So the photograph, and again, the metonymy of the snow, I'll justify it as metonymy at some point, um, makes her think of her father. And the impulse to call him is strong enough that she, as I was just saying, violates certain norms of politeness anyway, to call her father. And I would ask you, before looking at the scene that follows, to imagine it being 3 a.m. You're asleep, and in the old days, right, a loud telephone landline rings, and it's your daughter calling. What is your response to that, if not immediate concern, right? Something is wrong. Nobody calls at 3 a.m. Unless something's wrong. We'll leave the idea of drunk dials aside. They're a more contemporary phenomenon, right? So somebody answers at the other end of the phone, right? She calls her father, and somebody answers. Hello, hello. Jean would have hung up on her. Turns out to be her stepmother, Linda. But she heard the fear in Linda's voice like an echo of her own, and she couldn't do it. Hello, she said. So before moving forward, think about why Linda exists, right? Why does Wolf choose to include her? Why not just let the father answer the phone at 3 a.m? And the answer has something really essential to do with the way that storytelling operates. Jean wants to talk to her father, so she makes an effort to do that. And the first time, right, the immediate outcome of that effort is failure. Doesn't get her father, gets Linda. We know in famous writer school, we're taught that that these things of importance, especially when it comes to the introduction and escalation before the resolution of tension, take place at least in threes, at least. If Jean wanted to talk to her father, this is my point, called him, made the effort to get him on the phone, and he gets on the phone, there's nowhere further for this to go, right? So the effort has to be, by this logic of famous writer school storytelling, has to be frustrated. So here's Linda, and hello, who is this, please? Jean murmured. Gigi. Is this Gigi? It's me, Jean says. It's you, Linda said. My God, you gave me a fright. Of course she did. I'm sorry. What time is it out there? 10 past 12. It's 3 a.m. 3 o'clock in the morning here, lamb chop. We're later than you are. So we've got a bit of exposition here, right? The first thing we learn is that Jean's father is on the East Coast, right? If the new mall is on Buena Vista, chances are pretty good that Jean is in California. Her father is on the East Coast. So coming back to Jean being the worry that we have about Jean being alone in the theater, something having gone wrong, the boss is implicated in that, but the father isn't present either. Not present with her in California. But again, we expect deepening and complicating things to become available to us. So likely in some other way, larger way, Jean is alone regarding her father as well. I point that out only because as readers, one of the things that happens is that once we are kind of locked into the development of a character, right, of a circumstance, we are expecting these whatever is at hand is at issue to be complicated, and so we are alert. I mean, really, neurologically, we are alert to the clues of complication. So what I'm saying is, part of what makes this story as kind of nothing as it is, in one sense, masterful or exhibiting of mastery, is that Wolf knows that once we are in on our worry that Jean being alone in a place she shouldn't be alone is likely a metaphor, we are available to this even small ways in which it's likely to deepen. So I point all this out not because one ought to or even hope to have this much knowledge of a story in the mode of composition, in the moment of composition, but rather having written a couple of drafts, beginning to know for ourselves what the story is about, what the character is in fact dealing with, we can exercise greater control of it in revision. And if nothing else, right, all the things that I'm pointing out here, will be pointing out along the way, are things that Wolf would have become aware of and in control of over the course of many drafts, right? None of this happens the first time out. And I know regarding Wolf particularly that he's a demonic reviser, and that his stories come out looking so masterful because he spends the revision as a two-part enterprise. One part is trying to learn what the story really has going on, and the other is having come to that knowledge to then master all the pieces of it. In a way, and I want you to hear this as we go on. In a way, what I've just described, Wolf becoming aware of and then exercising ever greater control over, is perfectly consonant with Todorov's idea of ideological detail, right? So everything in the story is working toward deepening and complicating and ultimately simply expressing the sort of central concern, Jean being alone in the theater, maybe, right? So back to Linda, right? It was 3 o'clock in the morning here. I just wondered if maybe you thought we were earlier. Wow, hang on till I get myself together. A moment later, Linda said, there, pulse normal, all systems go. So where are you anyway? At work. That's right. Your dad told me you had a job. GG with a job. You're just turning into a regular little grown-up, aren't you? One can probably respond to this moment in a couple of different ways, but one thing that ought to strike us is that Linda, being awakened at 3 in the morning because her stepdaughter has called, right? And probably ought to be alarmed just by that fact, worried just by that fact, then finds out that this girl is calling from work, right? Where it's after midnight, right, on the West Coast, and she's at work, and she's free enough to make this phone call, right? So it's a very peculiar moment, but and maybe a worrisome moment, but what Linda does not do is worry, right? Linda acts as though she's impressed. Turning into a regular little grown-up, aren't you? Let that line, that idea of Jean turning into a regular little grown-up, sort of hang out for a moment. That's right, your dad told me I had a job, etc. Well, I think that's just super. Jean nodded. I'm a big fan of people doing for themselves, Linda said. 15 isn't too young. I started work when I was 12 and I haven't stopped since. So we kind of probably suspected this. I don't mean to speak for you, but I think if we were around the seminar table, one of the questions I would have asked earlier on is how old in this initial moment do we think Jean might be, as a way of measuring her degree of vulnerability? She seems competent at work, right? She takes care of the money as she's supposed to. She does the things that she's supposed to. And if she were 30, that might be A, expected, and B, the news that she's 30 would minimize our sense of her vulnerability. But that she's half that age, and she's 15, and this is Linda suggests a first job suggests, good Lord, suggests that suggests she's more vulnerable than she ought to be, right? And so reflect back on Mr. Munson, put pieces together. Mr. Munson, a regular, actual grown-up, has abandoned her, and that might sound like a strong word, but deal with it, has abandoned her, a 15-year-old, to deal with the closing up of the theater, including the handling of money, so that he can go ice skating. Linda, right, takes, and here's the other thing one recognizes in this exchange, I'm big on doing people for themselves. I was 12, right? So at the moment where she ought to think this 15-year-old is alone at work, good God, what after midnight, 10 after midnight, what's wrong? She makes it about herself, right? I was 12, right? You're doing okay, but I was 12. I know, Jean says to that. Not the first time Linda has delivered this news to her, which tells us something about the nature of Linda's presence in Jean's life. Christ Almighty, the jobs I've had. I could tell you stories. Jean smiled politely into the receiver. She caught herself doing it and made a face. Again, a small little throwaway detail, but we're watching a consciousness at work, right? That Jean at this moment has an attitude toward her stepmother that's expressed, but she also is, before it's expressed by making a face, she is in a sort of default mode, a default polite mode, smiling when we are maybe getting worried. I guess you want to talk to old Grumpy Bear. 2 more minutes here through this scene. Jean's father, if that's okay, I hope it isn't bad news. You're not Prager's, are you? All right. So Jean wants to speak with her father. Linda is presented as an obstacle to that. Has to get through Linda first. An obstacle, eventually a gatekeeper. When it finally becomes clear that Jean is calling at 3 a.m. so that, having been left alone after midnight at work, so that she can talk to her father, Linda becomes this gatekeeper. I hope it's not bad news, right? Well, she's calling at 3 a.m. What do you think is going on? You aren't Prager's, are you? Right? And each time I encounter that sentence, I think Wolf is smart enough to recognize that there's a vast difference between "you're not Prager's, are you?" and "you're not pregnant, are you?" Right? That there is a degree of respect or seriousness in one formulation that's absent from the other. So, in a way, right, just to point out what might be obvious here, Prager's versus adultery, right? One thinks and speaks, in Linda's case, in terms of Prager's, and the other doesn't yet speak in terms of adultery. So we've got now, this is why I mentioned Todorov and ideological details, we've got now a couple of times, these recognizable inversions of the position, the status of adults and the status of children, right? Even 15-year-old children. Mr. Munson goes skating. Gene thinks he's committing adultery. Linda is speaking in the kind of slang that I don't want to overstate the case, but in the kind of diction that that we might expect a 15-year-old to use. Anyway, no, how about your brother? Tucker isn't pregnant either, Gene said. He hasn't started dating yet. I don't mean that, right, etc. Over to page 7. Linda speaking about for Gene's father, who is not, she's not going to awaken. That's great, right? What she says about not being, Gene's not being pregnant, Tucker too, Tucker either, incidentally, that's great because you know how your dad is about bad news. He's just not set up for it. He's more of a good news person, right? Gene gave Linda the finger. She mashed it against the mouthpiece, right? So Gene's response, a couple of things. One, there's a ratcheting up of the tension between them. Between Gene, who wants to speak to her father, and Linda, who's obstructing that effort. For another, we are coming to an increasing sense of I think, two things. One is what Gene's father's home life is like, what it's about, and what Gene's place in it is about. But also, we're seeing serially these inversions of the hierarchy of adults and children. More on that in the next installment.